6 times. That's how many times Stephen Miller lunged across the table with his voice, his interruptions slicing through the air like jagged glass. 6 times, his words trampled over hers, each attempt louder, more dismissive, more dripping. With the arrogance of a man convinced the microphone, the stage, and the spotlight belonged to him alone. But something was happening in that room. Something that neither Miller nor the audience quite understood at first. Every interruption was a stone, piling higher, weighing heavier, until the moment would inevitably collapse on him. The cameras caught it all, his sharp gestures, his insistent voice, his constant need to dominate. And then, her eyes. Jasmine Crockett's eyes, calm but unwavering, fixed on him with a steady patience that told a very different story. She was not rattled. She was not silenced. She was waiting. The tension spread like static across the room. Staffers shifted in their chairs. A few onlookers rolled their eyes, others leaned in closer, sensing that something was building, something that couldn't be contained. Miller thought he was in control, but to everyone watching, it was clear, the more he interrupted, the smaller he seemed. This wasn't just about a debate. It was about the familiar, exhausting pattern of women, especially women of color, being spoken over, being minimized, being forced to fight for a fraction of the respect handed freely to men like Miller. Viewers felt the sting. They recognized it. They remembered times in their own lives when someone tried to bulldoze their voice, and their fists tightened with shared frustration. By the 6th interruption, Crockett leaned back ever so slightly. Her face unshaken, her hands folded as though she was simply allowing the storm to finish burning itself out. It was a picture of composure, and that composure was its own kind of thunder. What Miller didn't realize was that with every aggressive cut-in, he was setting the stage for something unforgettable. He was giving her space to craft the line that would shatter the arrogance right out of the room. 6 times he had tried to drown her voice. But on the 7th, the silence that followed would make the world stop scrolling, stop speaking, and start listening. No one in that room was ready for what Jasmine Crockett would say next. To understand why this clash mattered so much, you have to understand who these two figures were, and why their collision was more than just noise on a debate stage. Stephen Miller wasn't just another talking head. He had built a career on wielding words like weapons, carving out his place as one of the most hardline voices in modern American politics. As a senior advisor in the White House, he helped shape some of the most divisive policies on immigration, race, and national identity. He thrived in environments where volume could substitute for substance, where interruption could masquerade as strength. For his followers, he was a warrior. For his critics, he was a symbol of something darker, an America where arrogance drowned out empathy, where power excused cruelty. On the other side sat Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman, who carried herself with the gravity of someone who had seen the trenches up close. She was not Washington royalty. She was not groomed by think tanks or power brokers. Her path was built through hard fights, representing those who rarely had a seat at the table. She spoke with the cadence of community, the fire of lived experience, and the steadiness of someone who had been underestimated more times than she could count. When these two shared a stage, it wasn't simply about policy differences. It was about something larger, the eternal push and pull between those who abuse power and those who challenge it. Miller's interruptions weren't random. They were a performance of dominance. Each time he cut her off, he wasn't just talking over Jasmine Crockett. He was talking over everyone who had ever been dismissed, silenced, or told to wait their turn. That's why people leaned in. That's why social feeds started to buzz, even before the climax. Viewers saw themselves in the way Crockett stayed composed, even as Miller tried to yank the floor out from under her. They saw their mothers, their sisters, their neighbors, their own memories of being disrespected. The stakes of this moment weren't about who had the better argument. They were about who represented dignity and who embodied the corrosion of it, and that is why the tension was unbearable. People weren't watching to see a policy point scored. They were watching to see whether dignity could survive arrogance, whether calm truth could withstand noisy dismissal. Would this be just another moment where the interrupter won by sheer force? Or would it turn into something more, a moment that rewrote the script? The cameras caught every flicker of the drama. Miller leaned forward, hands slicing through the air, his voice raised just enough to signal control. Crockett sat steady, lips pressed in a small line, her silence more powerful than any interjection. Every second she waited, the tension rose. And the audience could feel it. Something was coming. Something beyond a debate, beyond a talking point. Because what no one knew in that moment was that the real story wasn't Miller's interruptions. It was Crockett's response. The power of a single line, just one sentence, that would not only silence her opponent but electrify millions beyond that room. This wasn't just another debate. This was about to become a defining viral moment. Stephen Miller's story was never one of quiet persuasion. From the very beginning of his political career, he thrived on provocation. As a young aide in Washington, he cut his teeth writing fiery speeches for politicians who saw confrontation as the purest form of politics. He was the kind of figure who understood that outrage could be currency, and he spent it lavishly. His rise was no accident. It was built on being louder, harsher, and more unyielding than anyone else in the room. By the time he entered the national spotlight as a senior advisor in the Trump administration, Miller had already cultivated a reputation as the architect of America's harshest immigration policies. The travel ban, family separations, the rhetoric of invasions at the border, all of it bore his fingerprints. His defenders saw him as brilliant, principled, and unwavering. His critics saw something different: cruelty packaged as strategy, elitism dressed up as populism. This reputation followed him into every room, every television appearance, every debate. Miller didn't just debate, he bulldozed. He cut off his opponents, drowned out their points, and left them scrambling to find air while he devoured the oxygen. To him, interruption wasn't rudeness, it was dominance. It was proof that he could own the stage by sheer force of will, but arrogance has a way of leaving cracks. And those cracks were visible to anyone who looked closely. His words were sharp, yes, but often hollow. When pressed for substance, Miller's arguments had a way of circling back on themselves, relying on repetition rather than revelation. His tactic wasn't about winning hearts, it was about exhausting the opposition. If he could keep others on the defensive, he could avoid ever being held accountable for the weaknesses in his own claims. In many ways, Miller embodied a broader theme in American politics: the performance of power without the humility of responsibility. He could summon outrage, but he rarely offered solutions. He could generate headlines, but not healing. And yet, he relished this role, the villain. To some, the fighter; to others. On that night, those same tactics were on display. 6 interruptions, each more cutting than the last. He leaned forward as though the very posture of his body could intimidate his opponent into silence. His voice rose just enough to dominate, to send the signal that he was in control. For Miller, it was muscle memory. This was how he had always won, not through reasoned debate, but through volume and force. But what he didn't realize, what he could not see, was that the audience had grown weary of it. People watching were no longer impressed by bluster. They were tired of voices like his, drowning out voices like Jasmine Crockett's. His arrogance wasn't simply grating. It was symbolic of a deeper sickness in politics, the idea that whoever shouted loudest held the truth. This was why the tension in the room felt heavier with each interruption. Miller thought he was winning. He thought the optics of cutting her off, of stealing her time, made him look strong. But for viewers, it was the opposite. Each time he opened his mouth over hers, his credibility shrank. Each time he dismissed her words, his own arrogance became undeniable. He wasn't just interrupting Jasmine Crockett. He was interrupting America's patience. The irony was thick. Here was a man who had built a career claiming to defend traditional values, yet his own conduct on stage revealed a lack of respect at the most basic level. Here was someone who preached law and order, but couldn't honor the order of conversation. Hypocrisy was dripping from every interruption, and the audience knew it. So when he leaned forward once more, cutting her off for the 6th time, nobody was surprised. It was Miller being Miller, following his script, playing the same tired role he had played for years. But what he didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett was also following her script, one written not in arrogance, but in patience, resilience, and a readiness to strike only when the moment was right. That was why this clash wasn't just another exchange. It was a collision between arrogance and dignity, between the hollow noise of interruption and the quiet thunder of composure, and it was about to produce a moment that Miller, for all his years of dominance, would never live down. Jasmine Crockett's journey was carved from grit, resilience, and a refusal to be silenced. Long before she sat on a congressional panel staring down Stephen Miller, she had learned the hard lessons of what it meant to fight for a voice in a world determined to mute it. Hers was not the story of privilege or insider connections, It was the story of persistence, of a woman who refused to accept that politics belonged only to those born into it. She grew up in a world where politics wasn't an abstract debate, it was survival. She saw firsthand the struggles of families ignored by the system, communities overlooked in the halls of power. When she spoke later about equity, justice, and representation, it wasn't because a consultant handed her a talking point. It was because she had lived the absence of those things. She knew what it meant to knock on doors for basic services, to witness families crushed under policies written without them in mind. Her path to Congress was paved with late nights, relentless advocacy, and battles that often felt uphill. As a lawyer and state representative before her rise to the national stage, Crockett made her name not by bowing to the establishment, but by confronting it. She took on cases that others avoided, stood with communities that others ignored, and proved again and again that she wouldn't be pushed aside. Every step of the way, she encountered the same familiar pattern: people underestimating her. They underestimated her because she was a woman. They underestimated her because she was young. They underestimated her because she came from communities they considered marginal. And every time, she made them regret it. Her sharp intellect, her refusal to be cowed, and her capacity to stay composed under fire became her signature. That composure was on full display the night Miller tried to bulldoze her voice. While he relied on arrogance, she leaned on experience. This was not the first time someone had tried to interrupt her. This was not the first time she'd been told to wait her turn. But unlike many who falter under that kind of pressure, Crockett understood something deeper. Silence can be a weapon. Patience can be devastating. Waiting for the exact moment to strike can make one line more powerful than an entire speech. Her supporters loved her for this. They saw in her the embodiment of communities long dismissed by the powerful. For immigrants, women, and working-class families, Crockett was not just another politician. She was proof that their voices could carry into the highest halls of government. She represented the pride of identity, the validation of resilience, the idea that no matter how many times you are underestimated, the story isn't over until you decide it is. When Crockett entered that debate, she knew what she was walking into. Facing Miller was not like facing just another opponent. It was standing across from the personification of everything she had fought against her whole career. His policies had hurt families like those she represented. His dismissiveness had echoed in the attitudes of countless men who had spoken over her in courtrooms, meetings, and legislative hearings. But she wasn't there to match his arrogance with arrogance. She was there to embody dignity, to show that strength is not always the loudest voice in the room. That is why, as Miller interrupted her again and again, she did not flinch. She did not break. Her calm stare, her measured silence, and the stillness of her body sent a message louder than any shouted rebuttal. I am not rattled by you. I am not reduced by you. And when I speak, the room will remember it. For Jasmine Crockett, this moment was never just about defending herself. It was about defending the countless people whose stories had been bulldozed by louder voices. It was about standing up, not only to a man on stage, but to a system that often rewarded arrogance and punished humility. It was about proving, in real time, that dignity is not weakness, and patience is not surrender. She carried into that room not only her own story, but the weight of those who had sent her there. The people who voted for her, who believed in her, who needed her to show that composure can win against chaos. And as the interruptions piled on, she was not simply enduring them. She was setting the stage for a moment of catharsis, a release of tension that would validate everyone watching who had ever been told their voice didn't matter. She wasn't just another voice in the room. She was the only one prepared for what was coming. The silence after the sixth interruption was thick enough to touch. The audience held its breath, the cameras lingered, and Stephen Miller mistook stillness for surrender. He leaned forward again, his words tumbling over themselves, trying to cement dominance in the moment he believed was his. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush to reclaim her time or plead for space. Instead, she let the silence bloom, longer than anyone expected. In that pause, the power shifted. Suddenly, it wasn't Miller dictating the rhythm of the room. It was Crockett, holding every second hostage with her calm, and then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was lower than before, deliberate, each word etched with steel. Are you finished, Stephen? Because America deserves to hear more than the sound of you interrupting. The sentence landed like a thunderclap. The air cracked. Gasps rolled across the room, followed by a beat of stunned silence. A few muffled Laughs leaked from the audience, the kind of half-guilty laughter that erupts when someone says exactly what everyone is thinking but no one dares to speak aloud. Miller froze. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. His body language betrayed him. The stiff shoulders, the darting eyes, the faint tightening of his jaw. The man who had interrupted 6 times now found himself searching for words. Crockett didn't let him recover. She leaned in, not with aggression, but with control. Her tone never rose. Her words never rushed. You've interrupted me 6 times tonight. 6. And every single time, you've proven less about my argument and more about your fear of it. If you believed your position stood on its own, you wouldn't need to bulldoze mine. The audience erupted, this time with applause. People clapped, some even stood, the energy in the room surging as if they'd all been waiting for someone to puncture Miller's arrogance. Miller tried to interject again, but the sound of the applause drowned him out. And this time, Crockett raised her hand, palm open, not in anger but in command. The gesture was simple, almost regal. And just like that, the applause quieted, not because they were done, but because they wanted to hear what she would say next. Stephen, she continued, locking eyes with him. You can talk over me. You can try to silence me. But you can't erase me. Not tonight. Not ever. And every time you cut me off, you only prove the weakness of your own voice. It was a line that carried weight beyond the room. It spoke to every woman who had been interrupted in a boardroom. Every young activist shouted down by someone older, louder, angrier. Every marginalized voice dismissed before it had the chance to finish a thought. In Crockett's words, they all found vindication. The audience felt it. The cameras captured it. And Miller knew it. His posture deflated, his voice faltered, and for the first time all night, he had no comeback. Crockett pressed forward, not with anger, but with a calm that cut sharper than any insult. You see, interruption doesn't make you powerful. It makes you desperate. And tonight, America is watching the difference between desperation and dignity. The eruption that followed was unstoppable. Applause thundered, echoing through the hall. Reporters scribbled furiously, commentators whispered into cameras, and hashtags began forming in real time. The moment wasn't just Crockett's victory, it was a cultural flashpoint. Miller, visibly rattled, tried one last time to reassert control, but the audience wasn't with him anymore. His words fell flat, landing with the weight of someone already defeated. He gestured, raised his voice, leaned forward, but nothing could undo the moment that had already crystallized. Crockett sat back, her hands folded once again, her face calm, composed, untouched. The mic drop wasn't a single sentence. It was the composure that framed it, the restraint that built it, and the dignity that delivered it. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't lashed out. She had simply told the truth, plainly, with the force of someone who knew the weight of silence as well as the power of words. And as the room buzzed with energy, Crockett delivered her closing strike. This debate isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can speak the truth. And I promise you, truth doesn't need to interrupt. It just needs to be heard. The crowd rose. Applause filled every corner, louder than any interruption Miller could muster. Cameras flashed, social media feeds flooded, and the clip was already being clipped, captioned, and shared before she even finished her sentence. Miller sat in silence. The man who had filled the room with his interruptions was now drowned out, not by noise, but by the clarity of a single voice that refused to be erased. The 7th line had landed. And the battle was over. But as the applause thundered, the true explosion was yet to come. Not in that room. Not in that moment. But in the millions of living rooms, phone screens, and news broadcasts about to replay the clip on a loop. The real war was about to begin. Online, the debate ended, but the moment had only just begun. By the time Jasmine Crockett walked off that stage, the world was already reacting. Clips of a 7th line, sharp, composed, unforgettable, were racing across timelines with the speed of wildfire. Within minutes, hashtags like **# let her speak ***, and ***# truth over noise *** were trending. Her words weren't just replayed, they were dissected, remixed, amplified. On TikTok, young activists synced her voice to music. On Twitter, journalists declared it the line of the year. On Instagram, the moment was clipped into reels, captioned with fire emojis, hearts, and the kind of comments that spoke less like political analysis and more like catharsis. This wasn't about one debate anymore. It had become a story people needed to tell each other, a reminder of what it felt like to see arrogance silenced, dignity defended. For Crockett supporters, the reaction was vindication. They had seen her composure, her restraint, her refusal to play Miller's game. And it spoke to something they craved in their leaders. Not just toughness, but grace under fire. In barbershops, classrooms, and family kitchens, people replayed the clip, nodding with satisfaction, some even tearing up. They saw not only a congresswoman holding her ground, but a reflection of their own fights to be heard. And Miller? He became a meme overnight. Screenshots of his stunned face circulated with captions like, asterisk, when you realize interruptions don't work anymore, asterisk and asterisk, that's the sound of getting shut down. Asterisk his performance, which he likely thought was strong, was now cast in the harsh light of mockery. For every supporter trying to spin his interruptions as strength, there were 10 voices pointing out the obvious. He had been dismantled not by louder words but by the quieter force of composure cable networks couldn't resist. The moment replayed. Across the political spectrum, progressive commentators called it a textbook example of dismantling toxic power. Even some moderate voices admired her poise, admitting that whether or not you agreed with her politics, Crockett had commanded the stage with something rare. Meanwhile, right-wing media scrambled, some blaming the moderators, others insisting Miller had been ganged up on. But the footage didn't lie.by the next morning. Crockett's line was etched into headlines. Asterisk, Crockett delivers debate knockout. Asterisk, asterisk, the sentence heard across America. Asterisk, asterisk, 6 interruptions, 1 line, total silence. Asterisk, the response wasn't just cultural, it was political. Donations to her campaign spiked within hours, the surge so sharp it made headlines of its own. Activists began calling her a rising star, some even suggesting the moment marked the birth of a new national voice. For communities that had often felt muted in American politics, Crockett's victory was more than symbolic. It was empowering. It was proof that interruption could be beaten without sinking to the same level. And yet, underneath the viral glory, something deeper stirred. Because this wasn't just about Crockett versus Miller. It was about what they represented. One side weaponized interruption, mistaking noise for influence. The other side wielded composure, showing that silence and precision could be more devastating than volume. In that contrast, America saw its choice mirrored back to it, a choice between arrogance and dignity, desperation and truth. Miller, for his part, tried to recover. The next day, he appeared on a friendly network, doubling down, insisting he had been passionate and that Crockett had been overly sensitive. But the spin rang hollow. The clips told the story better than his excuses ever could. And for the first time in a long time, Stephen Miller wasn't the one dictating the narrative. He was the subject of it. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. In a short post that morning, she simply wrote, asterisk interruptions. Don't silence truth. Thank you to everyone who knows the power of being heard. Asterisk, the message was understated, almost humble, but that was exactly why it resonated. She wasn't feeding the fire. She was grounding it, reminding her supporters that this wasn't just about a viral moment. It was about something larger. By then, it was clear. This wasn't fading in 24 hours. It wasn't another political clip lost in the churn. This was different. The energy was sticking. The resonance was growing. And everyone, from her allies to her enemies, knew it. The shockwaves had only begun. What started as a clash of interruptions was fast becoming something far bigger, a movement, a rallying cry, a turning point, and the question now wasn't whether people would remember Jasmine Crockett's 7th line. The question was what they would do with it. Asterisk, the resonance of Jasmine Crockett's moment was never just about debate strategy. It was about identity, dignity, and the fight to be heard in a country where too many voices are still pushed to the margins. For Black women, in particular, the moment cut deep. They had seen this scene play out in their own lives, at boardroom tables, in classrooms, in community meetings, where their words were interrupted, dismissed, or drowned out. Crockett's composure became more than politics. It became a mirror of lived experience, social feeds filled with posts that went beyond applause. They carried stories. One woman wrote, asterisk, watching her hold her ground without raising her voice. Reminded me of my mother at work, always the most prepared in the room but always talked over. Asterisk, another shared, This is what resilience looks like. I felt like she was speaking for all of us who've been silenced and told to wait our turn. It wasn't just women of color who saw themselves reflected in that moment. Immigrant families picked it up as a parable of dignity in the face of arrogance. LGBTQ+ activists shared it as proof that authenticity could break through noise. Younger progressives claimed it as an anthem against cynicism. You don't have to scream to win. You have to stand firm, believe in your truth, and deliver it. With precision, the resonance became almost spiritual. Churches replayed the clip in Sunday sermons, linking Crockett's calm defiance to biblical stories of facing giants. Civil rights leaders framed it as a continuation of the legacy of those who had stood up against injustice not with rage, but with unshakable courage. To many, Crockett was not just a politician shutting down a loud opponent. She was a cultural symbol reminding them of who they were and what they could withstand. And yet, the power of the moment didn't come from Crockett trying to claim all those identities. It came from her authenticity. She didn't frame her silence and precision as anything larger than the truth. She didn't lean into spectacle. She let others see themselves in her because her action was clean, unadorned, and undeniably real. That is why the resonance spread so quickly. It wasn't about what she said alone. It was about what people heard in it, what they felt in it, what they carried into their own lives after the debate ended. Even young students, often turned off by politics, found something magnetic in the clip. Teachers reported kids bringing it up in class discussions about civics. Some said, she didn't yell. She didn't give up. That's how you win. For a generation searching for leaders who could inspire without sounding rehearsed, Crockett had given them a moment that felt alive, unscripted, and profoundly human. Meanwhile, Miller's interruptions backfired on a symbolic level. For communities long familiar with being silenced, his behavior wasn't just rude, it was archetypal. He became the face of every boss who ignored, every teacher who dismissed, every politician who bulldozed. His voice was not just his own anymore. It carried the weight of a broader arrogance. And when Crockett shut him down, it felt like all those voices were being silenced in return, not by force, but by truth. The resonance grew, not because people were told to feel it, but because they couldn't help it. Crockett's moment became a shorthand in conversations, a gif in group chats, a story parents told their kids about standing tall. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was culture. It was identity. It was pride, and in the quiet after the storm. One truth was undeniable. Jasmine Crockett's line had moved beyond debate. It had become a part of people's own stories, woven into how they understood themselves, their struggles, and their power. But cultural moments don't stay suspended forever. They either fade, or they transform into something greater. And, as Crockett's moment traveled from living rooms to headlines to community gatherings, the question became, what comes next when symbolism turns into momentum?